3-month-old baby and his parents vanished into thin air, leaving behind a half-eaten meal gone bad. Weirdly, all their valuables and passports were still there, no signs of a leave or a conflict. What on earth could have made them up and disappear like that, right in the middle of lunch? In June 2012, a Chinese man named Max was frantic. He had lost touch with his sister's family, sister, Wendy, brother-in-law, Luke, and baby nephew, for a long time. Max, who was super close to Wendy, had a spare key to his sister's place. When he went to her apartment, things looked way off. The table was a total disaster zone, covered in rotting food and buzzing with flies. Since Wendy was a neat freak, this was highly unusual. Moreover, the missing wallets and passports indicated that Wendy and Luke hadn't gone on a trip. It was clear that something bad had happened, and Max knew he had to act fast. Then he immediately called the French police. A week or so later, the cops got a call about a creepy discovery that a jogger found a rotting human leg in the Bois de Vincennes. A few days after that, more body parts turned up in the same area. However, the summer heat had really taken a toll on the remains, and DNA tests only confirmed they belonged to an Asian adult male and female. The problem was, there were no heads, so they couldn't be sure if they were Wendy and Luke. Just when the French police were hitting a dead end, a woman named Heidi, along with her husband, turned herself in on June 16th. She admitted that the body parts found in the Bois de Vincennes belonged to Wendy and Luke, and that she was the one who did it. Actually, Heidi had been a person of interest in the case since she was Wendy's last known contact before the disappearance. But the cops couldn't find any blood at Heidi's place, and there wasn't enough evidence to point the finger at her. So, why did she suddenly decide to confess after fleeing back to China? Let's rewind a bit and talk about Wendy and Heidi's connection. In 2008, 25-year-old Wendy followed her brother Max to France to study. To pay for tuition and living expenses, she worked part-time jobs. One night on her way home, a thief snatched her phone. Before she could react, a Chinese guy stepped in and got her phone back. That guy was Luke, her future husband. Luke, a year older than Wendy, was from Fujian, China. He'd snuck into France years ago and was working illegally, always living under the radar. Over time, the two young strangers fell for each other and rented a place in Paris's 12th district. Not long after they moved in together, Wendy found out she was pregnant. At first, they were over the moon, thinking it would be a pleasure to raise a kid. So, even though they were broke, they decided to keep the baby, who they named Lucky. But reality hit them hard. Wendy had to keep up with her studies and work part-time jobs, and Luke had to work ASLO. The truth was, they couldn't take care of a newborn on their own. After a lot of thought, they decided to hire a nanny. That's when they met Heidi. Her resume was perfect for them. She lived in the same district, had a college degree, and was fluent in both Chinese and French. Plus, she had a 3-year-old kid, so she knew her way around babies. When Wendy and Heidi met, they found they were both from Liaoning Province, China, which instantly made them feel more connected. Heidi's place was always clean and tidy, and her voice was so soft and loving. Wendy and Luke decided to trust her with Lucky. They left their son with Heidi full-time, picking him up once a week. They paid her €800 a month and would visit Lucky from time to time. The weird thing was, Lucky was always fussy at home, but at Heidi's place he was as good as gold, mostly sleeping. Wendy thought Heidi was a natural with kids. However, what went wrong in this seemingly perfect arrangement? On May 23rd, Heidi noticed something was off with Lucky. He'd been quiet for a long time. Usually he'd be crying for a feed by now. She went to check on him and was horrified to find him cold and stiff, no longer breathing. She and her husband wanted to call the police, but they didn't have the right paperwork to work as a nanny, and her husband was undocumented. They knew they couldn't keep it a secret, so they hoped to reach a private settlement with Wendy and Luke peacefully. The next day, Heidi called Wendy, lying that her family back home was seriously ill, and she must go back at once, so that Wendy needed to pick up Lucky right away. When they were eating, Wendy and Luke dropped everything and rushed to Heidi's place, only to find their son dead. Heidi and her husband insisted it was a sudden, accidental death in his sleep and begged Wendy not to involve the police, offering to pay her off. Furious and heartbroken, Wendy attacked Heidi, grabbing her by the neck. Luke ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, attacking Heidi's husband. A wild brawl broke out. Heidi later claimed that out of defend herself, she grabbed an axe from the toolbox, striking Wendy and killing her unconditionally. Seeing this, Luke went berserk and continued attacking Heidi's husband frantically. Just when Heidi's husband thought he was a goner, Luke fell to the ground. Heidi, in a desperate attempt to save her husband, threw the axe at Luke, hitting him right in the head. Luke collapsed and died. Some hours later, when the dust settled, the apartment was a bloodbath. 3 lives were gone. To cover her tracks, Heidi dragged the bodies to the bathroom and dismembered them with a knife and a saw. She then drove deep into the Bois de Vincennes, burying some body parts and dumping the rest into trash cans. After cleaning up the bloody mess in her apartment with every cleaning product imaginable, including UV lights and special glasses, she sent her husband and her son back to China, then closed her bank accounts, put the apartment up for rent, and tied up all the loose ends. On May 30th, she hightailed back to China too. A day before fleeing back to China on May 30th, Heidi sent a text message to the dead Wendy to throw the police off track. That's why she was a prime suspect from the start. After fleeing back to China, Heidi eventually returned to France and turned herself in. She claimed that Lucky's death was an accident and that she killed Wendy and Luke in self-defense. She insisted she acted alone, saying her husband fainted during the fight with Luke and was clueless about the whole thing. And she only went back to China to settle their son, not to escape the law. But most people didn't buy her story. Why would she have an axe and a saw at home, ready to kill and dismember people? And how could a 5-foot-tall woman kill 2 people, drag their bodies, cut them up, and dump them? Yet, when the police asked her to reenact the crime scene, indeed, she could move objects as heavy as the victims. While Wendy's family and lawyer believed Heidi and her husband planned the murders, there wasn't enough solid evidence to prove it. Some people thought Heidi and her husband turned themselves in on purpose. Because in China, a family of 3 being murdered would likely result in the death penalty. But France doesn't have the death penalty, and there's a chance of parole for good behavior. So some people think Heidi confessed just to get a lighter sentence. There are still a lot of unanswered questions, especially about Lucky's death. Some people think Heidi used sleeping pills to keep Lucky quiet, and maybe she messed up the dosage that day. At the end of the trial, the prosecution couldn't prove that Lucky's death was accidental or that Heidi was negligent, and the whereabouts of the child's remains remain unknown. After a 4-year legal battle, on October 19, 2016, the court dropped the charges related to Lucky's death. Heidi was sentenced to 20 years in prison for double murder and ordered to pay the victim's family €325,000. Her husband was acquitted due to lack of evidence and was released from court. The verdict shocked the public. The main suspect in a triple homicide case was sentenced to only 20 years in prison. Even more shocking, on March 6, 2023, after only 7 years, Heidi was allowed to serve the rest of her sentence at home with an ankle monitor. Since 2017, she's been granted 21-day passes for good behavior and has received various sentence reductions. The prison warden said Heidi has been a model prisoner, participating in activities and even earning a baking certificate. If she keeps up the good work, she could be released on parole by December 2024, allowing her to reintegrate into society without any restrictions. Looking back, we can't help but wonder how this tragedy could have been avoided. Maybe it started with Wendy and Luke's impulsive decision to have a baby without a solid plan. Or perhaps it was the mistake of leaving their child with a stranger. But it's too late now. Wendy and Luke paid the ultimate price for their mistakes. As for Heidi, she got punished, essentially trading 3 lives for years in prison. In a word, this whole case is a stark reminder that we are ultimately responsible for our own destinies.